Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I am here solo today, Ashley, with my good friend Magnus, who lives here in Uruguay, fellow expat. I guess you might say expat. I don't know. That word sometimes has weird meanings, but he lives here now. He's a resident of Uruguay, like us. And a lot of people have asked me why I live in Uruguay, and I don't think I've ever talked about it in any length, just sort of escaping the madness or something like that. So let's just start by having you, Magnus, introduce yourself, give us a sense of like your background and what you're up to now, and then we'll just chat because we're friends and it'll be easy.
Sure. It was a lot easier to introduce myself 10 years ago when I was a researcher, because that was my entire life. And now I don't really care much about it. Now I consider myself as a free man, doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I also realize I still have this research mindset, I guess. So why don't we start with that? I'm a trained evolutionary biologist, worked with research for 15 years or something like that in Sweden, Norway. Originally, I'm Swedish, but lived in Norway before moving here. And yeah, evolutionary biologist specializing in plant evolution. But that's behind me now. Here in Uruguay, I'm at home basically trying to figure out how to build a straw bale house with obviously straw bales and earth plaster. And it works. It's going pretty okay. I brew beer like old motorcycles. Well, maybe I should also mention I'm married and have 2 kids. I should probably have done that first, shouldn't I?
Family man, a family project.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, most of all.
Mm. So okay, let's talk through. Okay, you're a researcher in Norway. I don't know if I've ever gotten the detailed version of this story.
No.
You and Virginia get together. Virginia's Argentinian. And what is the process by which you get convinced that you can't live in the global north anymore and that you have to come live somewhere else and seek some other kind of life?
Well, it turns out that we both had the same idea, and we figured that out really, really quick. That the life we were living it wasn't going to last. So she told me that her father has a piece of land here in Uruguay, and her plan was to quit biology one day when she got fed up with it and move here and open a small bed and breakfast or something like that. And I just looked at, well, I was thinking the same, but in southern Sweden. so that got sorted really quick. And then I think it was half a year after we met, my contract at the museum where I worked ended. And before they managed to renew it, because this is academia, they give you 6 months, another 3 months, then another 6 months, maybe a year, but they extend that. So before they managed to extend it, we bought tickets to Argentina and came here for 3 months or something like that, traveling around in the northwest of Argentina. Extremely beautiful. And by the end of that trip, she asked me, do you want to have a look at Uruguay? I spent a lot of time there as a kid. Yeah, sure, why not? And then we took the boat from Buenos Aires to Colonia, and something absolutely stunningly magic happened when we got off the boat there. I mean, it still happens when I arrive from Buenos Aires to Colonia, and my shoulders relax. I can breathe properly. I breathe deeper. the sky is bluer, everything is better. And I immediately fell in love with this country. And towards the end of that trip, it was a week or something here, I told her on the boat back to Buenos Aires, if you want to return to South America, I'm more than happy to live in Uruguay. I will never, ever live in Argentina, but here, definitely. Mm. And then 2 years later or so, she went back and bought this piece of land, 2007, and the plan was to retire. But then everything got worse. Nothing, because I was at that time, I was optimistic about stuff like climate change that I worked with as a side project, basically. I mean, I worked with old climate changes. So of course, I was very much aware of the ongoing climate change. And it was never there were never discussions about it. So I thought, well, someone is going to figure it out. And then I realized, no, it's not happening. I actually remember the turning point. It was 2011 or 12, coming back from a trip from here to Norway. And there was a conference at the university with these some of the people from what's called IPCC, and there was a minister of environments opening the session, and she said something like, "Oh, I'm so happy to be here today and see all these brilliant researchers, and I'm confident you're going to solve this." And I actually started to cry. We just had the kids, twins, and I mean, I was tired, overworked, emotional wreck, basically. And then I hear this, that we are supposed to fix it. And then, I mean, in my head, scientists never fix things. We investigate it, we discover it, we describe it. But the thing with the climate change is we're not fixing it. We're describing it with more and more precision and accuracy. We're not fixing it. We're describing how it's going to hell with more precision, more accuracy. And then I said to Virginia, we have to leave. We can't live here. This society, Norway, Sweden, it's too rich, too spoiled, and too dependent on import. We need something more resilient.
Yeah, and you know what?
And we moved.
And this is so relevant. I was just reading in my little group listserv of environmental scientists. There are now members of the IPCC who are in this listserv. I just got an invitation to a webinar. Like, basically, do we need the IPCC anymore? And this is hosted by people in the IPCC who are literally like, do you know that, I mean, you probably have a sense of the amount of resources it takes to write that report and the amount of time of top level scientists basically describing models in detail, and there's no political action that results from it. None that I know. It's
just a bunch of greenwash.
Yeah, and it's such a waste of energy and time. And then the whole logic behind it is something like, well, you know, I think there's something to like the rational science brain. If we just describe it in more detail, then we'll solve it or something.
Yeah, but we aren't.
No.
We aren't. I mean, they should use their time to temperate chickens instead.
Now
that would be better.
This is where we agree, and other people, I think, don't, or maybe other environmentalists aren't, haven't come to that conclusion like we have. So what brought you to that conclusion? Because I know my own specific journey had a lot to do with getting disillusioned with NGOs, getting disillusioned with academia, researchers, realizing like how siloed everybody is, and everybody's just sort of focusing on their own incentive structures. They just want to get tenure. The NGOs just want to get funding so they can pay their own salary. They don't really care that much about impact.
Yeah.
or their salary doesn't depend on having any impact. It just depends on telling people that they're doing good work. So I was like, this is screwed. Like we got to come up with something. We have to do something, anything that has like any potential for action. And that's why I turned to like these small scale things that basically families can do, individuals can do, or communities can do, because I just feel like any scale bigger than that, it's a whole lot of greenwashing. But I don't know what was your thought process like?
No, my thought process was provided to me by my wife, basically, because we had this argument in the lunchroom at the museum where she got a lot of shit from our coworkers, our friends, when she said, no, it's not about carbon dioxide. It's not, that's not the main problem. The main problem is how much energy we use, what kind of food we eat, how much garbage we produce. And I disagreed with her and said, no, we can fix this. And I mean, this wasn't the only time, and she's not, I mean, you know her, she's not an aggressive person. She just asked me to explain it to her. And of course I couldn't. She's doing this all the time to me.
This is the right approach, I think, actually. There's,
yes.
Asking
because
people to explain it, like explain your
yes.
thought process, and then they realize like there's not it's actually just a belief system, not logical thought process.
Exactly. And initially when she turned my mind from carbon dioxide to the energy and the resources in general, I started to read a lot about it, but then I realized, what's the point? Why do I read about it? It's obvious.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we can't have a society that is based on growth. We can't. We live on a finite Earth.
Yep.
We can't grow.
I remember this moment where you and I were in Colonia hanging out a couple years ago, and you had just read a book about oil and fossil fuels, liquid fuels, and you were like, and I had gotten convinced of that years before this whole peak oil thing in like 2010, 11. I was like, oh my gosh, everything of our society is built on this. But I remember you having this like more a deep realization of how much everything is reliant on cheap liquid fuels, and you were like, it's everything. I'm like, I know.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, because a while after, a couple of years maybe after we moved here, I was contacted by one of my friends, former colleagues, and I think he's an anthropologist or maybe even sociologist or something. He's one of those weird scientists, you know.
Soft science, not real.
Soft ones. Yeah, because we had funding for the same project, basically, from the Research Council. And one of the things we had to do was work together. They tried to create some artificial synergy, which never works, of course. But in our case, it worked because we liked each other.
Okay, yeah, that works, yeah.
So I was invited to join some of their discussions. They were going to make an exhibition at the Historical Museum about collapse. And he asked me, do you want to sit in? Yes, why not? So, and I noticed that he was very surprised that I was so familiar with the concept of collapse. But he never asked anything. And then one day I said, I'm sorry, but we're moving because this isn't working anymore. And he just laughed. Oh, that's why you had such personal insights in the topic, he said, and could contribute to the discussion, basically. I said, yes. And then he invited me to write a book chapter together with some really cool, still active scientists in Norway. And he was interested in my opinion, basically, because the others, they published their research and I published my opinions.
Yeah.
And now I forgot what I was going to tell.
Oh, I
How
don't
do you
know,
even
but
begin?
I'm curious about this.
Yes,
Like, oh, sorry.
the oil,
Oh,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Because part of it was, I mean, we live off grid. We have solar panels and batteries, and people love that. It's so environmentally friendly, they say, which of course is complete bullshit. Nah, it's ridiculous. I mean, how do you make solar panels? Do you make them from rare earth metals, nasty stuff using nasty
They just
chemical
grow. They grow
processes?
naturally
And
out
you
of
use
the earth, Magnus.
shitload of fossil fuel.
Yeah.
So that's ridiculous. Very recently, I read a paper claiming that the energy return on investment, is that
Yep.
EROI,
Yep.
is below 1 for solar panels. Depends on how you calculate, but it's below 1. And then you have to add 800 kilos of lead acid batteries that will last us another 5, 6, 7 years. So, I mean, that's just crap. And to come back to the oil part, our batteries, they weigh 800 kilos. They can, when they were new, they could store 26 kilowatt hours of electricity, which allows us to use about half, because they are lead acid and you shouldn't cycle them too deep. That's not good for them. So we have about 13 kilowatt hours of electricity available in those batteries when they're fully charged. Do you know how much available energy you have in a liter of gasoline?
No.
If you put it in a modern engine, it's about 10 kilowatt hours. So our 800 kilos of lead acid batteries is just a little bit better than 1 liter of gasoline. We have good batteries. I mean, now you can of course get pretty good lithium-based batteries, but it's still the same ridiculous proportions between the energy storage, the energy density. Oil is fantastic. It's so energy dense. And not only that, as we talked, it's everywhere. I mean, different petroleum derivatives are in everything. And people have no idea. They want to phase out fossil fuel. They have no idea what they want to phase out. They want to phase out the society as it is. There's no way.
Right. Well, and that's the thing that I'm always fighting about, because there's these, Extinction Rebellion protesters, and they're saying something like, stop new drilling, which, okay, that maybe the theory is that they're forcing less oil contracts to come to fruition, and then that forces prices up, and then that forces some changes in energy use. There's almost no discussion on lowering use on this side, as opposed to just lowering production. It's like those things are related, people. And I think my theory is that you need all of these people to be experimenting with and learning how to adapt to lower energy use now, rather than forcing it from the top down. I mean, just imagine all the people whose whole life is just purchasing everything in the store and driving in their car, and they have no skills whatsoever. They're used to just turning on the faucet and it's hot water. Like, every part of their lives is dependent on this cheap fuel. The infrastructure that's required to make that shift, it's mind-boggling. I mean, you basically in the global north would have to live more like we do here in Uruguay. And that takes the whole shift of how do you heat things? It's a whole infrastructure. How do you heat things? What, how do you get around? What do you eat? Who produces what around you?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I appreciate that they are engaged. Extinction Rebellion and all these things. But I mean, I don't think they realize what they're asking for, the consequences.
And you know, and I like, I don't know, because I don't know if my time is even best spent taking issue with those people or not, but I just get so frustrated because it's young people and they're basically told, they're so self-righteous, like just get out there in front of parliament and, you know, block traffic. In the meantime, they're just alienating working class people who are like trying to get to work.
Yeah.
And I personally think there is a lot of I don't know, you could make a good case that would be very inclusive around this slower pace of life, more free time, less overall work, but less overall consumption, some home production of things. Like, I think when people start getting into it, they really enjoy it. And it's actually something that could unite people across class.
Absolutely.
But I don't think that, like, I've talked to environmental activists about this, and they're like, we need a bigger scale. You can't just have some chickens. But it's just a lot. It has to start at that scale, and I just can't get around them. So, okay, another question I have for you is how you brought up this collapse book. I'm wondering, how was that book received? Do you think that, like, what is? I'm curious, what's going on in people's minds? Are more and more people like aware of the doom?
Today, yes.
Okay.
Compared to when the book was released, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I would say yes. I read Swedish media, I read Swedish news, and there's a dramatic shift. It's still focused on climate change, but I mean, when we left, there was almost nothing written about it. It was something in the future, a comment to yet another IPCC report or something.
Right.
But now it's in the news every day, every single day, in basically TV, radio, written media, everything. And there are also voices now in the biggest newspapers actually pointing to this. But do you realize what the consequences will be if we stop using oil? And I mean, that's what Europe is facing now with the oil, the Russian oil they want to quit.
Yep.
That's going to be a dramatic effect.
Yeah, what do you think is going to happen there? Because honestly, the part of this is really horrible, I think, but this is how I think, because I tend to think in like historical, materialist, like Marxist terms. Okay, so I tend to think like people will just be forced to make these shifts by lack of resources. So if there's like some interruption in pipelines and flows of fossil fuels or commodity crops around the world, people will make a shift, and that's happening right now. I mean, in terms of like wheat in Ukraine and Russia and energy, but I don't know exactly what that shift is going to look like. You know, how are they going to respond? Are they going to double down on industrial production of things? Are they going to make any sane decisions in terms of lower energy use or more?
No. That, I mean, so what we've seen, what I've seen in Sweden is because fuel prices have gone up insane. I mean, a liter of diesel is, how much is that in dollars? It's $2.50, $3 a liter. And I mean, that of course, it's basically car owners complaining.
Okay.
And they complain a lot. I mean, all the time it's too expensive. They want to save the world by stopping climate change, but they don't want to limit their driving their cars.
They don't want to limit their consumption in any way.
No, but I mean, so the government is, of course, reducing the taxes a little bit, or what they're doing now is they're actually handing out a check, basically. Symbolic thing is ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And that pisses people off, of course. And there's an election coming up this autumn in September in Sweden. So again, I mean, please just do something real. So when they are faced with an increased cost for energy, and it was also the same with the electricity last winter, they subsidize it. I mean, you have, there's a common electricity market in Europe. So I mean, even if Sweden has a lot of electric energy available, the prices will go up anyway because they sell it to the highest bidder, basically. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but that caused a very enormous hike in the fuel and electricity prices. And again, they were given some token money instead of actually realizing this is the future. This is what's going to happen.
Yeah, I wonder what, well, I mean, and then they're just printing money, and then it'll just cause more inflation from printing this money and just giving out so many stuff. So back to your earlier point, you said this isn't going to last. We need to get out of here. Yeah, I just think like there's this quote that always I always remember, Americans will always do the right thing when they have no other choice. And I do think there is something to that, like the global north, and just historically it makes sense. Okay, you have the most amount of resources in human history. You're not going to just give that up and go gently away from it. I mean, people are just going to keep using it. They're used to it. And they're just going to double down on that until there's no other option than they're forced to do something else. And of course, when that happens, it'll just be, people will think it's for some other reason. They'll say, oh, there's just sectarian violence or something like that, when it's actually just a resource crunch. But so that's the doom, that's the global north. This is what we've escaped. So let's talk a little bit about life here in Uruguay. I can talk to the things that we're hopeful about. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, where we got together with some producers in Uruguay who are doing agroecology, regenerative agriculture. I was so blown away by that. I mean, I already had an intuitive sense that there's good people doing this stuff here in Uruguay, but there's a whole movement, there's a whole network. People are not just producing this way, they're connecting with other people who also produce this way, and making their own. This was a cool thing. I don't remember the woman's name, but they were making their own supply chains, like via WhatsApp groups. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, that's something that Uruguay continued to surprise me. I mean, the level of these things, the enormous networks and the determination people show. This country is actually close to resilient. They care about these things, and because everything is so expensive here, few things are imported, and people live simpler, which means it's less vulnerable, and they do that with the food as well. I mean, the way Magdalena keeps her cows, and the way she's creating, not she, but her cows are actually making fertile soil. I mean, I love that.
It's so good. It's so good. And then the other thing is, I think what really resonated to me, so we're talking about Magdalena Urioste, who is affiliated with this group called Pampeanas Regenerativas Orientales, so regenerative, like gauchas of Uruguay, and basically they're affiliated or like connected to this Savory Institute, and Alan Savory is this this guy who's sort of developed this method that, or sort of series of procedures, more or less, that could be used in specific locations to do regenerative agriculture. So usually rotational grazing, moving the cows in a certain way that builds soil, helps biodiversity. And what's so cool is Magdalena is not only connected with Alan Savory. They had a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture here in Uruguay a few months ago, sometime in the middle of the pandemic. So the agriculture ministry is interested in this kind of thing, and they're going to produce beef in Uruguay. So you might as well do it in a sustainable or regenerative way, and they're open to it, it seems. And then, so she's connected to this international network, but also a local network of women doing this work. I thought that was really cool. But the thing that resonated with me on her talk was her journey. She talked a little bit about living and working abroad in all of these, high levels type office jobs, and how she gave all that up and came back to Uruguay, her home country, and how she describes the how nice her life is. I mean, the day-to-day of production, the wildlife that's coming back to her property, the way she connects with her customers and almost thinks about like it's her duty to provide high quality, nutritious food to people. I don't know, that was so moving to me. What did you think?
I loved it. I again, I got tears in my eyes, but for a completely different reason. But no, I was so impressed with what they are doing. I didn't know this. I had no idea. And I mean, maybe that's worth mentioning for people who listen. I don't eat meat, but I love what she's doing. It's so good.
And I think you can make allies. The thing that I think, I don't know, so if we're going back to the Extinction Rebellion discussion, it's very hard to make broad allies in that movement. It's a very specific movement. It's for people who are convinced that climate change is the main thing. A lot of people, it's like urban people, it's educated people. In this particular thing, I was realizing there's a benefit for everyone to do this small scale production. If you're worried about supply chains, this is good for you. If you just want a more sane quality of life, this is good for you. If you like quality food and you don't trust the quality of the food, this is good for you. I mean, basically, there's a reason to get involved for anyone. And the other person who spoke, who I loved, is my neighbor here, Lavinia Agustin, who we started calling the Joel Salatin of Uruguay, because he's so over the top and he's so great. And maybe you should tell the story of how he reacted to that fertilizer graph.
Oh yeah. When he, what happened? So someone showed the graph, current price development of the commercial fertilizer and how it spiked end of last year, I think. And what did he say? I don't remember.
He said, put that back up. Yeah, he said, put that back up. I love this. Everyone, the point of showing the graph from our friend Matt was, this is going to cause cascading effects. This is something we should be worried about. And Augustine says, I love this graph, because it means we're not going to do this shit form of agriculture anymore, and people will be forced to do other things. I love this. This is so good for all of us.
Yeah. That's interesting, because when I started to realize what was happening with that was end of last year, you couldn't buy fertilizer in Scandinavia. You couldn't order it, you couldn't buy it. So farmers didn't sow any fall seeds. Well, some farmers, and now they've sorted it out a little bit. And I talked to my wife about that, and she said, this is going straight to hell is going to be starvation. And again, she just slapped my face, not physically, but yeah, maybe people stop eating that crap and start eating food. And you know what, Magnus, she said, most of that fertilizer isn't used to produce food. It's used to produce crap.
Yeah. Commodities.
And
I mean, it's the commodification of food. I mean, not just animal feed in CAFOs, but also just things, industrial products.
Yes. And also something that came up at the meeting a few weeks ago was, I don't remember who said it, but if you start to fertilize your grassland, the equivalent to the North American prairie here, the pampas, you destroy it. It dies.
Yep.
You will have to continue to fertilize it. But if you don't, and if you rotate your animals, you don't need to fertilize. It's going to be better even with grazing and trampling and all that. But somehow, and I mean, the whole thing is so complex. Not necessarily complicated, but complex. There's so many parameters, and I think greed is one of them. Mm. Why do we? I mean, in Norway they fertilized the forest. They were happy fertilizing the forest because that the trees grow faster. But at the same time, they knock out all the fungi because they can't handle all that nitrogen. So you get much less diversity, and the trees, the wood you get from the trees is just crap quality. It's fast grown. You can't use it for anything, possibly paper. But so I don't know why we have ended up in this situation. We're simply too stupid.
And I think it's also the time horizons. Like our whole culture is about getting as quick as possible return on things.
Weird. It froze.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just saying the time horizon. Like we just want as quick as possible return on investment, as opposed to a culture that thinks in multiple generations, for example. And I've been starting to think more and more, like fundamentally it comes down to a perspective that like centers legacy, that centers life beyond me and life beyond like me as an individual. And that even comes down to things like how parents think about their kids and inheritance. There's a whole culture in the US that's like, I'm not giving you anything. I'm going to spend all my money before I die to make sure you don't get anything. That's a cult. That's like a real thing that exists in the US. There are farmers who are in their 80s and 90s who will not pass on their farm to their children because it's industrial now and they don't need a lot of people to work it. They can just run it via GPS basically. And the children are in their 60s.
Yep. Oh, you froze again. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Wait, hold on.
No, it works.
Patrick's coming to say hi for a moment.
What's up, Magnus? Sueco?
Everything's excellent.
Wonderful. I was just returning the Doomer Optimism vacuum cleaner into the Doomer Optimism headquarters over here. It's stored in the same as the computers. Ciao, Sueco. Nos vemos. Gracias por aparecer.
Ciao.
You're
married to that guy, right?
I know, and he's been on this podcast before.
I heard him.
I've let him be on before.
I loved the episode where he interviewed himself with the help of a beer.
Yeah, it was basically just him and Jason chit chatting, which was great, which is fine.
Yes.
You know, and it's fun. Yes. People enjoy friends talking.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was good. The social side of things was really good for me to see. I'm going to be going also to this meetup. That's this particular meetup was sort of semi-organized by myself and our friend Matt Smith. But there's another meetup with this Magdalena woman. that she's organizing with this regenerative women's group at the end of May. So I'll be checking that out, and I'm really excited to see, like, just to see all these people in person and to just learn what they're up to. But that's exciting, the social side of things. What else do you want to say about life in Uruguay, the distinction, the difference between, you know, what life is like for you now versus what it was like before you came to Uruguay?
Oh, for me personally, I'm happier. I thought I was happy in Sweden, Norway, but that's nothing compared to how I feel now. I'm more relaxed, more content, more satisfied with what I'm doing. And I do silly stuff. I grow food, I build houses, yell at my children, and even that is pleasant. So, I mean, I'm happier, definitely happier.
And
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, but people, I mean, if you follow these expat Facebook groups anymore, I don't know if you do that.
A little.
I occasionally look at them, and people are so disappointed, and they are so unsatisfied with what they get here. The quality of things, the quality of the food, the quality of the life, basically. But I love it. I love the slow pace. And even though it's annoying not to be able to buy proper tools, I mean, I can do a lot with the stuff I have here.
And I think for me at least, it's like if you embrace it and see the see it as part of like this, I don't know, at least for me, I've been seeing it as a kind of detox process, like detoxification from the mindset of the United States, at least, which I think still beats Northern Europe or Western Europe in terms of efficiency, individualism. I'm on my own. The only measure of success is how much money you make or how big of a house you have. And thinking about what one's worth is measured by your career or money. Not thinking at all about the other parts of life that matter, like connection to others, free time, time with your kids and family, time to explore things that you're interested in, as opposed to just the things that you have to do for money as part of your salary. I mean, imagine having a life where you could explore your interests.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's what I'm doing now.
I know, and I want to hear about these different interests, because for me, part of it is like just realizing like that there is space for that, and increasingly, you know, we're renovating this ruin, we're trying our hand at little animals, we're planting trees, we're, you know, and little by little I'm realizing like I can lean into these projects and learn skills and produce something with my hands, including raising my children myself as opposed to putting them in daycare. You know, so I want to hear a little bit about your process of like getting into, I mean, you were already into brewing before, but getting,
I started brewing because
scientific mind for this. And honestly, a lot of people on our podcast are using their skill set and their perspective from their former lives, and they bring it to production, to building, to agriculture, to brewing, to all this stuff. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the brewing part is a lot of biology and lab work. So I mean, it's a fermentation process, and I ferment chilies to make fermented chili sauce, vegetables, basically anything. The fermentation is fantastic. My wife is doing this water kefir thing, which I
failed with the kefir, but I started kombucha.
Ah, you did?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And
Yeah,
I feel so
yeah. I
like special and cool because I did not only the fermentation with the kombucha, then I took it out and mixed it with some juice and did a second fermentation, and it's like this bubbly juice. I feel like it's, and every single batch is different, and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like
yes.
like I have an apothecary or something, you know?
Yes, the joy of fermentation. And I mean, it works. It's a simple process, and or it's easy to ferment something that tastes fine. But then the variance, the variation you can get out of it, if you start digging into the process, that's super fascinating. And there, of course, a bit of a lab and biology background helps a lot.
Yep.
And when it comes to building houses, that's just physics. You need to figure out how the forces work.
And how did you end up getting convinced about a straw bale house? I don't think I've ever asked you this. You and I went on a workshop one time, but you were already convinced. You and I went to this workshop with this guy
Gernot Minke, yeah,
who is a German researcher who's actually done, I don't know if anyone has done as much research on the building materials of natural construction, you know, similar to building science, but with earth and straw, and what are the insulation factors, what are the load bearing factors, this kind of thing. And we went to a workshop with him. That was fun because he came with like a very German sensibility. And remember, and he was like, "That's not how you do it," telling people and teaching them hands-on. But
yeah, he was very strict. No, but I mean, he's extremely knowledgeable, and as you say, I don't think anyone has done as much research on earth and straw as he has done. He knows a lot. So I like that, and he also, I mean, but there's still magic in his building. It's not only science and physics and boring forces here and there. It's actually magic too, and I like that. I mean, not magic, but there's this creative process,
and the specifics of place. I mean, which soil you get in a particular place interacting with a particular climate,
yes,
it's going to be different every single time. So it's like an art. It's a process
exactly.
Art where you as a human are like using your brain. It's not just a formula where you get the industrially made product at the store. You're working together with the earth, with the place.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that sometimes annoys me, because I'm a member of these natural building groups on Facebook and so on, and all the time people are posting about a new prefab material, the straw bale panels and the ready-made clay mixes, and I mean, that's just the same shit all over again.
We can't just not reinvent this stuff. We can't, as a species.
No, we have to make it industrial, and I think that's a pity, because then we're going to use the wrong materials to build with, because not everything is suitable to use everywhere.
Right.
And we shouldn't try to standardize everything. We standardize building materials because it's easier to construct a set of building codes if you have standardized material. And you want building codes because you don't want people to die in their houses, and you don't want them to sue you after you have killed them with a shitty house. And I think, I mean, of course, I think it's a good thing not to die in a house you built, but with a bit of common sense. And don't skip your mathematics and physics classes. You need them. So, I mean, what is it? I don't know what it's called in English, the school of hard life, or
school of hard knocks,
like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that sucks. That's not going to keep you alive. You need to understand the basics. But then it's not that difficult to build a reasonably sound house. And maybe it's not going to last forever. If you build it with clay, it is going to be susceptible to rain. You will have to replaster the exterior every now and then. But it's fine, it's free. You dig up more clay, you mix it with some cow shit and straw, and there you have it. It's only costing you time, and that's a pleasure. I mean, you should use your time for something creative and valuable, to make something valuable, and exterior plaster is valuable. So
yeah, I have another question on this topic. Okay, so there's all these subgroups of people involved in something, like, let's just take earth building as an example. Out of these alternative movements, in my opinion, there's always these sub niches that to me resemble religion. So with the Minka crowd, there was a real aversion to plastic because it's not natural material. Among the Earthship crowd, I found them to be the least religious in terms of, like, yeah, well, if it works, that's fine. But they're like tires, using garbage, using bottles, using even plastic bottles mixed with earth. And then there's the issue of, since a lot of these technologies, let's just say, they're very old technologies, but they're new to us, new to most people who are messing with them or practicing with them. So the expert knowledge you get on them is so across the board, and everybody's got an opinion, and everything is like so wildly variable. To me, that's one of the biggest barriers to getting involved with these kinds of things, because you don't know who to believe, who's really an expert, what's the actual way to do this. You hear one person say one thing, another person say another. You can't tell whether it's a belief that they're saying or like actually true. And then, like, you have to kind of figure out where you stand. And I know, for example, you prefer doing carpentry with accurate right angles that are square. And
it's easier if you're a beginner.
And that's not true for all natural builders here in Uruguay. So, no. You know, I don't know. This, like, what are your thoughts on this? How do you navigate this? You know this world like I do now. It's just these little sub niches, these little mini religions, and who do you actually believe? How do you like figure out where you stand in this?
Well, I mean, the reason I want straight lumber is it's easier to build with, and I think for me as a beginner, it's important to learn how to make a straight and flat wall with a straight and true corner. If I can't do that, how can I make something else? How can I know I can do what I want if I can't do simple things?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and I also like the aesthetics of it. I don't mind bottle walls. I mean, those walls you build with where you put glass bottles in them and make patterns and stuff. They can be nice, but they are really, really, really time consuming to plaster. Trust me, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. To make it nice. I mean, you can of course slap on some mud and call it a day, but I don't want to do that. It's not my kind of aesthetics. And I don't know. I honestly, I don't know. I met people in this environment that I like to work with. I don't always agree with them, but they're pleasant to be around, and I learn from them. And if it makes sense, then I adapt to it. I make it mine. So at the moment I'm trying. So I'm going to have earthen floors, adobe floors in the straw bale house, and I need to seal it with something that protect it from everyday wear and also some water spill stuff like that. And I'm going to use linseed oil. And I've been looking for good quality linseed oil in Uruguay for several years without finding a good quality linseed oil. So now a friend of mine from Sweden came to visit, and I asked him to bring me an oil press. So I'm going to make my own bloody linseed oil.
Wait, where do you get the linseed from?
Oh, from a neighbor of yours. There's a couple, Maria and I don't remember his name, but they have a small, they have a mill. They grow linseed. You meet them every weekend at Lavinia, selling various flowers.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And we met them a while ago because Virginia is, they help her mill her wheat.
Yeah.
And we talked about linseed oil because I ask everyone, do you know anyone who produces linseed oil here?
You're obsessed.
No, but yes, I am. And it turns out at least he grows linseed. So I asked him, and I'm going to try his oil. But I mean, then that's not enough, because that gives you a raw pressed oil, and you need to refine it. And then you have to decide if you're going to use it raw and refined, or if you want to boil it. And if you boil it, linseed oil boils at, if I'm correct, 285 degrees Celsius. That's really hot.
Yeah.
And that's also about that temperature where it can ignite if you're unlucky. So the question is, should I actually boil it at 285, or should I do, as some people say, boil it around 100 degrees Celsius in a simple water bath? Or should I boil it at 180, as some other people say? Should I add glycerol to it, as some even other people say? And I've been asking around, and I get these different opinions, and they're just opinions. No one is doing it. And now finally I found a Swedish Facebook group where they actually produce commercial oils. And some of them are now giving me their best secrets, how to treat the oil. So I might actually be able to make some decent oil.
This is so fun.
I mean, this is taking forever.
I know. And you know what, though? What it reminds me of is pre-industry, we had this knowledge. I mean, not necessarily linseed oil, but whatever would be the local equivalent for a sealant, yes, for floors. We had this knowledge. People knew, yes, this is what you do. This is how you make it. And the amount of knowledge on small scale production that's been lost is just crazy. And when we're trying to figure this stuff out again, I mean, luckily we have a lot of scientific tools. We have the internet, we have people writing about things and resources. But again, rediscovering this is such a process, although it almost feels a little bit like a treasure hunt or something.
Yes.
In a good way, once you figure it out, you're like, I figured this out. I rediscovered this process that was probably lost, that, there would be some person that everybody knew, this is the person who presses the linseed oil, and this is who you go to, and this is, I don't know. So it's like on one hand, like seemingly overwhelming at first, but then I have also noticed that the process of relearning these things, it's almost like a virtuous cycle. Like you learn some things, and that gives you a basis for understanding, and then you learn more things, and all of these things interact and connect. And so the knowledge has a kind of scaffolding, where you're adding to it. It's not like you're starting from scratch from each thing when you're learning new things. I was learning about lime plaster and asking people online their different opinions, and that's one of those things again that has a million different opinions. Take it all. Take the whole. I talked to architects and people who are like actually builders, stonemasons, or masons, and the architects looked at pictures of my building, my ruined building, and said, take it all. take it all down. It's too dangerous.
But is that people here in Uruguay, you ask?
No, Europeans and North Americans. And then the Masons said, you know, buildings, these old buildings have like a magical way of staying together. As long as you don't remove any big structural thing at once, if you do it little by little, where you're replastering and retuck pointing and then removing the roof in pieces and replacing it in pieces, it should be fine. And then what mix of lime plaster to use? There's a million opinions about this.
And what kind of lime? What kind of lime are you going to use?
Yes. And then do you soak it in advance? And if so, for how long? Once you put it on, do you keep it wet? And if so, for how long?
Yeah.
But it also is just a process of experimentation. And then once you do it, I do have a kind of attitude of like, I want to try to do this as best as I can. But then, you know, at a certain point, it's good enough. You know, I can only try so hard with this.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we are learning. We can't expect. We can't expect from ourselves to be able to make something that a master did 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I mean, they did that kind of stuff all their lives. And someone trained them. Yep. They didn't invent it themselves. And a lot of that knowledge is not completely gone, but I mean, there are only fractions of it surviving. And that's something I find extremely interesting when I talk to people about what's going to happen with this world when we run out of energy. And I mean, in a collapse situation, no, with our knowledge, we're going to live a good life. And I mean, no, we're not.
Our knowledge
isn't enough. That takes an industry.
And our knowledge is about industry. And our knowledge is basically like how to live in an industrial civilization. That's it. I mean, that's
what we know.
The extent of it. Although the optimism side is that there's so many places in the world, including Uruguay, which occupies a kind of half-developed place where it's not so underdeveloped. But I just had someone on the podcast a week ago who was saying there are some countries in Central Africa where the entire year-long energy use is as much as it takes to run a refrigerator for one day. So I mean, it's just, you know, there are places in the world that that still know how to live in very low resources. A lot of people in poverty, though, because of the simultaneous industrial life that lives side by side with it. But I mean, yeah, I do think that the optimism is in trying to learn from places that aren't so far lost, aren't Absolutely. So far developed that they've lost all their skills. And I think for me, one of the most important things is not just the skills, but the social skills. Like here in Uruguay, everybody's sharing things, you know, people are asking for favors and giving favors, and people in North America, at least, I don't even think they really understand how this works. And I'm just learning, but it's like, people talk about like, yeah, the barter economy of old, like the barter economy never went away. It's just asking favors for people and borrowing things and giving some extra when you go to a party. Every person who we know, whenever we have a party, they bring us marijuana because it's so easy. Everyone has a surplus and everybody grows it. And it's just one of those things where we don't, I mean, I don't smoke almost at all. Patrick barely at all. And you know, I think it's just really funny that that there's always a little gift economy, you know?
Yeah. So next time I come to visit you, I'm going to bring you a big bag because I can't get rid of it. I don't smoke myself, and I used to have too much.
No, I know, we have that same thing, and now we're just gonna have to re-gift it too. When Patrick McDonald, our neighbor, passed away, really cool guy, and God, he would have been a great guest on this podcast.
Oh,
He had a bunch of plants, and Chris, his partner, gave it to us, and we were like, I mean, I think it was like $1,000 probably worth of drugs. I'm like, but I don't want to sell these. I'll just give them away. I don't want to become a drug dealer just because I inherited this guy's plants. But okay, so wrapping up, any last thoughts? You know, a lot of people who listen to this are people who are like basically just coming to grips with the doom. And I think a lot of people who at first come to grips with the doom, two things happen. One, they just kind of like, they like get into a depressed mental state, like, oh my God, what is this? I can't handle it. Then they just kind of like get depressed and stuck in that for a while, and that's not good. And then another thing that happens is they like sort of focus their energy on things like climate protests or, you know, this, I don't know, like just abstract movements. I tend to make a different argument. Let's try towards this other, you know, kind of life, whatever that means for you. It doesn't mean you have to be a farmer, but that you could do other kinds of craft production. You can work less, you can consume less, you can spend more time with your family and friends. Is there anything else you want to say from your perspective, your experience, that you think might be helpful to this person on this doomer to optimism arc?
Yeah, I mean, don't be depressed. I mean, don't waste energy on getting depressed. It's really, really a waste of time. Instead, find people. If you're interested in learning building skills, construction, find people. There are lots of people doing this everywhere, basically everywhere. And it's the same with farming. I mean, what you really need what you need in order to survive and live comfortably, that's just water, food, and a dry place to sleep. And if you can provide that for yourself, if you can learn how to produce it, even a little part of it, that's going to make you very, very self-confident. You're doing something real. You're learning a skill. You don't just protest against something. You're actually doing a positive thing. And I think that's important. I mean, just getting depressed won't serve anyone except the
pharmaceuticals.
The pharmaceuticals, yes.
That's perfect. That's a perfect place to end.